Welcome back. You're watching Newscentre with me, Parikshit Luthra. Prime Minister Modi has said in Assam that India is taking steps to ensure self-reliance in the energy sector. Now, this comes at a time of great geopolitical volatility and uncertainty. The Prime Minister was in Assam this weekend to inaugurate a bioethanol plant. The 5,000 crore rupee plant is part of a larger strategy to increase share of cleaner fuels in India's energy mix. Prime Minister asserted that India is working on becoming self-reliant to meet our energy needs. All this comes at a time when the US is pushing India to cut down on Russian oil imports and buy more US energy products. Now, before we discuss this, here's the Prime Minister speaking about self-reliance in the energy sector in Assam.
हम बहुत बड़ी मात्रा में कच्चा तेल और गैस विदेशों से आयात करते हैं और बदले में लाखों करोड़ रुपए हर साल भारत को दूसरे देशों को देना पड़ता है। हमारे पैसों से विदेशों में रोजगार बनते हैं, वहां के लोगों की आमदनी बढ़ती है। इस स्थिति को बदला जाना आवश्यक था। इसलिए भारत अपनी ऊर्जा जरूरतों के लिए आत्मनिर्भर बनने की राह पर चल पड़ा है।
All right, we're now joined by Anish, who is the global head of the energy sector at KPMG, somebody who's looking at energy transition all across the globe closely as well. Anish, thank you very much for being with us. Let me begin by asking you about India's challenges at this point with the energy sector. We are continuing to buy more energy from Russia, even as we increase the energy partnership with the US. Now, increasing oil trade with the United States, how do you think this is going to increase India's import bill, and what kind of pressure does it put on the country?
Yeah, I think there are more than the import bill, Parikshit. First, thanks for having me. But more than the import bill, I think the extreme vulnerability that we have is a big challenge. We are importing 90% of our crude oil, more than half of our natural gas, and it is creating a massive amount of vulnerability. We are exposed to the geopolitics. Things happen in other parts of the world, and we carry the can. So I think that has to change in the direction of travel, which has been increasing imports of oil and gas, has to reverse at some time. And I think that's what Prime Minister mentioned. He mentioned about ethanol, of course, but beyond ethanol, even crude oil production, gas production from domestic sources or sources where we have control and access is going to be very, very important. So yes, if we buy from the US, there'll be a delta on costs. But I think the strategic implications of going for more domestic sources or sources we control is far higher than the costs which we would have incurred.
Right. Anish, what is your sense at the current pace of production? What will be India's energy production capacity, oil and gas production capacity by, say, 2030? And how much more can we really do?
So we have to aim for a much higher production. And it starts, in the case of oil and gas, it starts with exploration being much, much higher than where it is. The government has opened that up. It's a long cycle, from an award of acreage to the production is a 7, 8, 10-year cycle, and especially if they're offshore, deep water assets, it's a long cycle. But we have to embark on that journey. So government is giving out of acreages now. Most of the country's areas which were hitherto sealed off because of security reasons has been made accessible. The fiscal regime has become much more conducive. The contracts have become simpler. So I think there is a lot of freeing up which has happened, but it's a long path. The government had already cleared the decks for some of these moves, but the recent geopolitical developments make it even more emergent and urgent to progress much more deliberately on that path. In terms of how much,
right.
it can go up. Hard to answer that question because this is a chancy industry. But I would say that unless over the current production base, if you don't go up 30, 40% in the next 10 years, then we are looking into trouble.
Right. I would also like to ask you about the next phase of reforms that India should have in the energy sector. The reason why I'm asking you this is because currently there are consultations on within the government as to what more reforms can be announced to make it easier to do business. Specific to the energy sector, would there be any recommendation you would have?
See, there are a couple of recommendations. One, of course, is on the GST side of things. There's been a long-standing demand for including natural gas in GST. And I think that would be, it's not simple because it's, of course, it's a federation, so there are federal politics involved, but that's one of the near-term steps, in fact, a long-pending step which can be taken. But for increasing exploration, the government has already done a fair amount. There are some residual fiscal bottlenecks which come from history, different kinds of litigation and cases and policies taken in the past, which is hard to unwind. But I think that would be the final frontier to unwind those residual cases, which then can really open up to international investments as well. But I hasten to add that simultaneously we should be creating national champions, and not only in the public sector, but in the private sector, who can really scale up exploration and eventually production of energy commodities.
Right. Just to also ask you about India's energy transition roadmap. We have a roadmap of achieving 500 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2030. What more does India need to do in order to accelerate the pace of energy transition all across sectors?
See, Parikshit, the first thing which we have to look at is the demand for energy, because you have to serve whatever energy demand comes up. You have to make it efficient to serve, but you have to serve that demand. And given the economic trajectory which we are seeing or likely to see, it's going to be a significant amount of demand accretion over the years. Unlike, say, Europe, which is on the demand is reducing. Here we are going to accrue demand on a very significant scale for the next 15, 20 years, which means that we'll need every form of energy. So I wouldn't be choosing one form or the other, even if they have different carbon implications. But that said, I think that the low carbon sources have to be accelerated. And that's not so easy as setting up just a generating asset of wind or solar or biofuels, for example. It's a whole supply chain which needs to come together upstream of the asset and downstream of the asset, transmission capability to absorb that, storage, energy storage, all of that needs to come together. And that's fairly complex because there are physical constraints on how much capacity you can build in transmission. There are cost issues, pricing issues, all of that have to be solved, which means that, a much more comprehensive view than what we have taken previously has to be taken. And I know that the government has seized up this issue. It's not a new issue. But in light of what we are seeing as energy security issues, I think there's a new lens which we have to add and act with urgency on some of these matters. Just to take an example on the capital equipment production, capital goods production, we are heavily dependent, for example, in transmission sector, on overseas sources, largely out of Europe, which are running at capacity. Somewhere we have to find a way to expand the manufacturing capacity for capital goods, which are related to the energy sector on a much larger scale, especially in critical areas. And then further beyond that, we have to go into the innovation ecosystem and the R&D ecosystem where India has fallen behind, because we can't always depend on foreign technology. We have to finally find technological fixes which are also made in India.
All right. Thank you very much, Anish, for joining us on the program. That's all we have time for here on Newscentre. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.